Rain had been falling since dawn, tapping lightly against the cracked window of the small apartment Ethan Walker and his little sister Lily called home. It wasn't much, just two bedrooms, peeling wallpaper, and a rattling heater that groaned every time it kicked in. But it was the last thing they shared with their parents before the accident. Ethan tried to keep the place together, working part-time at a local grocery store, juggling bills the way an 18-year-old shouldn't have to. Lily sat curled up on the couch, hugging a faded backpack that had traveled with her through 3 different schools in 2 years. Her eyes, soft and anxious, followed Ethan as he picked up the white envelope on the floor. It had a golden seal from a law office, clean, official, and strangely intimidating. "Who would even send us something like this?" Lily whispered. Ethan didn't know, but when he opened the letter, his breath caught. "We regret to inform you of the passing of Mrs. Ruth Walker. You and your sister, Lily Walker, are the sole heirs to her property located on Redwood Ridge. Their grandmother, a woman they barely remembered, someone wrapped in blurry childhood memories. The smell of pine needles, the scratchy wool sweater she always wore, her quiet, gentle smile. Their parents had avoided talking about her, always brushing off questions with uncomfortable looks and quick subject changes." Lily leaned closer. "So, we inherited a house? A real house? In the mountains?" "Looks like it," Ethan replied, though his voice carried more weight than excitement, because the letter didn't say anything about why. The lawyer asked them to come sign papers. Nothing more. No details, no explanations. Lily's hopeful expression flickered. "Do you think it's safe?" Ethan forced a reassuring smile. Steady, brave, the way he'd learned to be since losing their parents. "It's a house, Lil, not a monster, and it's better than staying here forever." The truth was more complicated. Their apartment lease was ending. Money was tight, and Redwood Ridge was the last place on Earth Ethan expected their lives to intersect with again. That afternoon, as they boarded the old bus heading toward the mountains, the driver looked at them through the rearview mirror with a mixture of pity and warning. "You folks heading to the Walker place?" he asked, voice low and uneasy. "People don't go up there anymore." Ethan tightened his grip on Lily's hand. "We don't really have a choice," he answered. The bus pulled away, leaving their old life shrinking behind them, and the unknown growing just ahead. The bus dropped them off at the bottom of Redwood Ridge just as the clouds began to thin, letting in thin streaks of pale sunlight. The mountain road was narrow, quiet, and unsettlingly still, like the world was holding its breath. Ethan slung both duffel bags over his shoulders, his posture tense but determined. Lily walked beside him, her steps small but curious, her eyes darting across the towering pine trees that wrapped around them like a dark, whispering wall. When they finally reached the old Walker house, they stopped in their tracks. It looked exactly like the kind of place people avoided in scary stories. Weathered wood, sagging porch, crooked shutters, and a mailbox hanging by a single rusty screw. Yet there was something strangely peaceful, almost nostalgic about it, like the house had memories waiting inside, frozen in time. Lily nudged Ethan's arm. "Do you think Grandma Ruth really lived here all by herself?" "I guess so," Ethan said quietly. "But it feels like she just stepped out for a minute." And it did. When Ethan pushed open the front door, it didn't groan like an abandoned house should. The living room smelled faintly of dried lavender and old books. A knitted blanket was neatly draped over the sofa. A tea mug sat on the coffee table, empty but clean, as if recently washed. Lily whispered, "This is creepy, but also kind of cozy." Rusty, the stray dog that followed them from town, sniffed around eagerly before trotting straight toward the hallway. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not threatening, more like a warning. "Rusty?" Ethan followed him into the bedroom at the end of the hall. The room was simple, a wooden bed, a dresser, fading floral curtains. But Rusty stood rigid beside an old wardrobe, scratching lightly at its base. Ethan crouched down, feeling the floorboard with his fingertips. There, a hollow sound. He pushed the wardrobe with all his strength. The heavy wood scraped across the floor, revealing a tiny hidden door carved into the wall. Lily gasped. "No way, that's like straight out of a movie." Ethan's pulse quickened. He reached for the latch. The door gave way with a soft click, opening into a narrow dust-coated passage. The air that drifted out was cold and heavy, like a secret exhale. Inside was a cramped room lit by a single forgotten lamp. Piles of notebooks, faded maps, newspaper clippings, and a small metal lockbox sat neatly arranged on a wooden table. Lily's voice trembled. "Ethan, what is all this?" Ethan stepped inside, a chill crawling up his spine. "I don't know," he whispered. But whatever Grandma was doing, she didn't want anyone to find it. Rusty whined softly, ears flat. And Ethan realized for the first time, this inheritance wasn't just a house. It was a message, and maybe a warning. Ethan brushed dust off the wooden table as Lily stood frozen in the doorway of the hidden room. The space felt strangely alive, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Faded maps covered the surface, marked with red circles and messy handwritten notes. Newspaper clippings, yellowed from age, were pinned together with rusty paper clips. Every piece felt intentionally arranged, purposeful, like someone had been building a puzzle no one else was meant to solve. Lily picked up one of the clippings with trembling hands. "7 local children vanish. Families demand answers." Her voice cracked. "Ethan, this is from 20 years ago." Ethan's throat tightened. The article mentioned Redwood Ridge, their town, their home. He sifted through more clippings, each headline more chilling than the last. "Search teams find nothing. Case closed due to lack of evidence. Sheriff's office denies further investigation." Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide and watery. "Why would Grandma Ruth keep all this?" Before Ethan could answer, Rusty growled low in his chest, the fur along his back bristling. He stared toward the window in the hidden room, the only small opening looking out into the forest. Ethan moved beside him and peeked through the glass. A figure dressed in a dark, heavy coat stood at the edge of the tree line, barely visible between the pines. Motionless. Watching. The figure's face was hidden beneath a hood. A cold, electric fear shot through Ethan's spine. He stepped back. "Lily, someone's outside." Her breath caught. "What do they want?" "I don't know," Ethan said, heart pounding. "But we need to keep everything here safe." They shut the hidden door, pushed the wardrobe back, and hurried into the living room. By the time Ethan pulled the front curtain aside, the figure was gone, vanished into the woods as silently as mist. The town suddenly felt much closer, much darker. The next morning, Ethan and Lily walked into Redwood Ridge's small downtown area. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where shop windows were decorated for the seasons, and locals chatted casually over morning coffee. But when people saw the Walker siblings, conversations quieted. Eyes followed them. A heavy, unspoken tension lingered in the air. At the general store, an elderly woman stocking cans froze when she recognized them. "You're Ruth's grandkids," she murmured, her voice soft but uneasy. "You shouldn't be up on that mountain alone. Your grandmother, she knew things. Dangerous things." Ethan's voice was steady, but inside he felt a knot tightening. "What kind of things?" The woman glanced around, leaning in. "Secrets this town buried a long time ago. Secrets some folks would do anything to keep hidden." Lily swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, what did Grandma get herself into?" Ethan didn't know, but as he looked around at the fearful faces, he felt the truth settling deep inside. Whatever Grandma Ruth had uncovered, they were now standing right in the middle of it. Ethan and Lily made their way out of the general store, clutching the few groceries they could afford. The elderly woman's warning echoed in Ethan's mind like a storm he couldn't outrun. Redwood Ridge looked peaceful on the surface. Quaint storefronts, tidy sidewalks, American flags fluttering in the breeze. But now Ethan saw the shadows beneath it, the long glances, the uneasy silence. The way people stiffened when they heard the name Walker. Lily tugged on his sleeve as they crossed the street. "Ethan, everyone's acting like we're trouble." "We're not trouble," Ethan said softly, though doubt gnawed at him. But maybe Grandma Ruth was onto something this town didn't want to face. Before heading back up the mountain, they stopped by the diner. A small, silver-sided place with checkered floors and the smell of fresh coffee drifting out the door. Ethan hoped someone there might know more about Ruth, maybe someone brave enough to talk. Inside, the bell above the door jingled lightly. A handful of locals sat in booths, sipping coffee from thick white mugs. The waitress, a woman in her late 60s with warm but tired eyes, froze when she saw them. "You two must be Ruth Walker's grandkids," she said quietly. "Sit wherever you like." They slid into a booth near the window. The waitress poured them each a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly. "My name's Marlene," she said. "I knew your grandma." "Not well, but enough." Lily leaned forward. "Was she scared of something?" Marlene sighed, brushing a strand of gray hair behind her ear. "Your grandma was a kind soul, sharp-minded, brave. But after those children went missing, after the town stopped looking, she started digging where no one else would. She kept asking questions. Too many questions if you ask the wrong people." "The wrong people," Ethan repeated. "Like who?" Marlene hesitated, glancing toward a man sitting alone at the counter. He wasn't looking their way, but something about his stillness felt intentional. Too controlled, too aware. "Folks in positions of power," she whispered. "People who didn't want anyone poking around their business. Your grandma got threats. Had her tires slashed once. Sheriff claimed it was kids messing around, but Ruth swore it wasn't." Ethan felt his stomach twist. "Did she ever tell anyone what she found?" "She tried." Marlene's voice broke slightly. "But people were too scared to listen." Lily swallowed hard. "Are we in danger right now?" Marlene didn't answer. She didn't have to. When they finally stepped outside, the late afternoon sky was darkening. Clouds rolled over the mountains in thick, heavy waves. Ethan clicked Rusty's leash on, and they began the uphill trek back toward the house. The air felt colder, sharper, like the ridge itself was breathing down their necks. Halfway up the trail, the low rumble of an engine broke through the quiet. Ethan spun around. A black pickup truck was crawling up the dirt road behind them. Slow, deliberate, predatory. "Ethan," Lily's voice trembled. "That's the same truck from last night." Rusty barked wildly, pulling at his leash. "Run!" Ethan shouted. They bolted into the trees, branches whipping against their arms. The truck skidded to a stop and a man slammed the door shut. Heavy footsteps pounded after them, fast, unrelenting. "Keep going!" Ethan yelled, grabbing Lily's hand. They ducked under branches, stumbled over fallen logs, their breaths ragged in the cold air. Rusty barked relentlessly, trying to keep pace. The forest seemed endless, but desperation kept them moving. Finally, the trees parted, revealing the back of the Walker house. Ethan practically dragged Lily up the steps, shoving her inside before locking the door behind them. Silence. Then, bam! A fist slammed against the door so hard the wood shuddered. "You kids think you're smart?" A deep voice growled from outside. "Stay out of things you don't understand. Last warning." Bam! Another hit, harder. Lily clung to Ethan, shaking violently. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, trying to steady her breathing, even though his own heart raced like a drum. The pounding stopped. Heavy footsteps retreated. The truck engine roared and faded into the distance. For a long moment, neither sibling moved. Finally, Lily whispered, "Why are they doing this?" Ethan stared at the hidden room behind the bedroom wall, at the truth Grandma Ruth had guarded with her life. "They're doing this," he said quietly, "because Grandma found something someone desperately wants buried." He looked at Lily, small, scared, but brave in her own fragile way. "And we're not running anymore." Morning arrived gray and restless, as if the mountain itself sensed what was coming. Ethan barely slept. Lily sat beside him on the couch, wrapped in a faded quilt that once belonged to Grandma Ruth. The fear from last night still clung to them like cold fog, but something deeper had taken root too: determination. Ethan reached for the stack of documents from the hidden room. Maps, old bank records, letters, and the most important piece: Grandma Ruth's handwritten journal, pages filled with her steady, stubborn handwriting. Every line carried a weight that felt almost sacred. "We can't keep this to ourselves anymore," Ethan said softly. Lily nodded. "We tell the whole town. Today." They packed everything into Ethan's backpack and started down the mountain toward Redwood Ridge Square, where the town held its annual community meeting. When they reached the square, the place buzzed with chatter. Folding chairs lined the lawn. A small stage stood near the flagpole, draped with banners celebrating the town's heritage and unity. Ethan almost laughed at the irony. The mayor, Henry Caldwell, stepped up to the microphone. He was a tall, silver-haired man with a polished smile, the kind of smile people trusted without question. He began speaking about community, progress, and responsibility. Ethan's fist clenched. He turned to Lily. "It's now or never." Before fear could stop him, Ethan stepped onto the stage. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Caldwell paused mid-sentence, confusion flashing across his face. "Mr. Caldwell," Ethan said, voice shaking but loud enough to carry, "Before you talk about unity, I think the town deserves to hear the truth." A hush fell over the square. Ethan unzipped his backpack and pulled out Ruth's journal. "My grandmother didn't hide up in the mountains because she was strange or antisocial. She was investigating the disappearance of 7 children, kids this town forgot." Murmurs rose, faces twisted in disbelief, then concern. He held up a newspaper clipping. "The sheriff closed the case, but he was pressured by people who didn't want the truth getting out. People in power." Caldwell's smile vanished. "Son, you don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Ethan fired back. "These financial records show money redirected from the town's relief fund. This map marks where each kid disappeared. And this," he held up a brittle letter, "this is Grandma Ruth's warning that she was threatened. By you." A collective gasp surged through the crowd. Caldwell's face hardened. "This is slander," but he was interrupted by a trembling voice from the audience. "Ethan is telling the truth." Everyone turned. An elderly man with a walker stepped forward. His name was Frank Dawson, once a junior member of the council decades ago. Frank's voice cracked. "I was part of the committee. We were told to keep quiet. Caldwell said the missing kids were an inconvenience to the town's reputation. Ruth begged us to tell the truth, but we were too afraid." The crowd erupted, shocked, angry, heartbroken. People who once looked up to Caldwell now stared at him with betrayal burning in their eyes. Police officers, county officers, not local, stepped toward the stage. Someone must have called them when tensions rose. Henry Caldwell tried to flee, but the officers caught him by the arm. His polished image shattered as he was led away in handcuffs. Lily grabbed Ethan's hand. She was crying, but this time it wasn't fear. "It's over," she whispered. "Grandma's finally heard." The town turned toward the Walker siblings, not with suspicion, but with gratitude. For the first time, Redwood Ridge saw Ruth Walker for who she truly was: a protector, a truth teller, a woman who refused to let innocence be buried. Weeks later, Ethan and Lily opened the Ruth Walker Community Center right inside the mountain house. A place for kids after school, a safe haven for families, a home full of warmth, light, and purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped over the ridge, Lily asked softly, "Do you think Grandma's proud of us?" Ethan looked at the glowing windows of the house that once held secrets but now held hope. "I don't think," he said with a gentle smile. "I know." He turned toward the viewers of their story. "If you were in Ethan's place, would you dare reveal the truth even if the whole town stood against you?" And with a deep breath, a final message. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional, powerful stories like this. Your support keeps these stories alive. Subscribe now to stay with us on the next journey.